Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. So last week we were talking about lesson planning. Remember that? Yes. It was our last lecture and we started talking of what is a lesson plan, what is the importance of lesson plan, and why do we need an effective lesson plan. And we also saw that why a lesson plan is necessary and how it helps the learners in the learning process, and particularly foreign language learning, the process. So this was our last lecture. Let's review it first and then we will move on to the second part of this topic, that is lesson planning. So my dear students, you all remember in the last lecture we discussed that preparation of a teacher is a must. Teacher needs preparation, and how we can see that preparation once the teacher brings a well prepared, a well thought over lesson plan, right? So once the teacher brings a lesson plan, and then he uses that lesson plan in the class, so it shows that the teacher has done his homework. He has come prepared in the class. So therefore, of course, in every good educational institution, you might have seen that in fact the institution manager, the educationist want the teachers to have their lesson plan. And some institutions you might have heard, you might have seen that they ask for the lesson plan for the whole week. And what teachers do in this case particularly, that the teacher make lesson plans for the whole week, right? So why is this important? Why there is focus on lesson planning? Because this is what that the teacher has to execute in the class. If the teacher does not have a lesson plan to execute in the class, so chances are there that the class could be failure. It could not be a success. Generally, it is believed that whenever you go for a class, you have to have a lesson plan. And some people are of the view that inexperienced people do not need that lesson plan, or sometimes lesson plan varies from subject to subject. Yes, of course. But every subject, when you go and you have the course outlines with you, and you need to be clear what to discuss in that particular lesson. So therefore lesson plan is important, and that shows your preparation for the class. So that's why, of course, we talked about in the very first lecture, that we talked about role of a teacher. So in that we saw that the teacher's knowledge, teacher's performance, teacher's in fact competence is a must for the class. So if he has done his work, and if the teacher in fact has produced an effective lesson plan, so this lesson plan definitely helps him in the class. Otherwise the class could be a chaos, could be a disaster. So if you want to have a smooth flow of different phases of an oral lesson, so you being good the teachers, you have to have a proper lesson plan. And in lesson plan we saw that there should be a clear and explicit presentation of aims, that what are the aims of that particular lesson that you are having, or for that specific lesson plan. Well, so we saw that there should be explicit presentation of aims of that lesson plan, that what does a teacher want to achieve. And I gave you the differences between objectives and aims, and I told you that aims are more in fact general. An objective can be specific, so you need to be clear about it, right? And then we saw that the teacher in fact needs to have a checklist, that what to teach and where to teach. This is very, very important, that that particular language item, that model sentence, that if the teacher is of the poetry or the drama or the novel, So literally in literature, right, some people are of the view that we don't need any lesson plan for that. You have to have that that novel with you or the drama with you to teach. But again, if you see, but we are talking about teaching language, of course, teaching English as a foreign language. So here what we need to have, that we have to have a clear lesson plan. On that lesson plan, our aims should be crystal clear. And again, we need to mention the time frame for each stage of an oral lesson. It means that if you have the presentation stage, you need to give specific time, right? You need to mention that what is the duration of this presentation stage and what will be the duration of the subsequent stages of an oral lesson. If you are clear, then things would be easy for you and you would not be under any stress while holding that session. So this is important for you. And then I told you in the last lesson that, you see, every good teacher, I mean, what he does, that he keeps on taking notes. At the end of every lecture, what he does, that he writes some points. So he spares some time for that points, and that points could be about the success of that class or about the failure of the class. If the teacher feels that it was a very good class and he really enjoyed and students really enjoyed, and of course the feedback can be taken, so those points can be mentioned there, that well, this was the activity in the class and it was a real success, right? So this, and then again teacher needs to write that how, what brought that success and why that happened. So with that, because teacher is fresh then after the class and things are clear to him, so he can write those points, and why these points are required, why this information is required, because if it is a success, so I mean the teacher tries that activity again, and if he feels that, of course, for many times an activity can be a success, however for another class it can be a failure, or again it depends on the understanding level of the audience or the age of the audience or the background of the audience. So it depends, it varies, right? But if you feel that one activity is a success for a large sample size, so we can say that, we can generalize that it is, I mean, good activity. Like you see so many activities we talked about, we talked about games, we talked about role plays, we talked about discourse change, and we'll be talking about these things. So why we still consider these activities an important part of the language class? Because people have used them for ages and they have found them successful, right? And that's why we still, in fact, when we hold classes, so but we do that, we in fact make students work in groups, we make students work in pairs. So this is what, because these activities have been used for ages, for years, and educationists and the teachers of foreign language, they have accepted them that these are, see, really good activities, and they really help the learners learning the foreign language. So this is what important, that you see what you do. You keep a record for the future reference, and you keep on updating that, you keep on improving it. And then of course you see that what aids do you have, of course, which teaching aids that you have. It's really important. Mind you that we will have a session on that, use of effective teaching aids in the class. We'll have a lecture also on that. And then of course when you make a lesson plan, you anticipate the problems of the students, the problem of the learners. And again, of course, I mean here the problems can be cultural problems, problems can be linguistic problems, these problems can be situational problems. So again, it can be, I mean, we can call it resource problems. So these problems the teacher must anticipate in the lesson plan, and how to address them, how to fix them. These things, I mean, the teacher, of course, he keeps in mind. And then what is the concept, what to teach, and what would be the procedure. It is very important that the procedure is the sequence, how to achieve it. I mean, what to teach is simple, but how is what the procedure, right? Which activities would you we would use, and what would we do in the presentation stage, and accordingly, in fact, what would be, how would we make our students the practice, right? And then how we make our students produce in the production stage. So this is what you see in a lesson plan. The teacher in fact needs to be clear about it, that of course the aids, the teaching aids, then what are the anticipated problems and how to address them, and of course what is the concept, and of course the procedure. So this one is in fact our last lecture which we talked about, and generally we saw that how to improve our lesson plan, what are the different suggestions, if you remember, and then of course we discussed that what to include in your lesson plan. This was where. And today's our of course lecture is the second part of this lesson plan, influences on the content of the lesson. Of course on the lesson mean the lesson that you are going to teach. So what influence, right? I mean, what can affect your lesson? So if I ask you, can you answer my question? Can you give some views on it, that what can influence a lesson plan? You are of course student of this course, and you see we are having this course and for second time. You see it's our TEFL 2. So what can influence our lesson, or particularly the content of the lesson? Yes, and any ideas do you have, students? Some barriers could be there. Okay, which barriers, for example? Okay, some technical barriers. For example, there is a noise outside. Okay, fine. Anything else? Understanding level of the students. All right, because we cannot read minds of the students. We just see. I mean, we keep in mind the assumed knowledge of our learners, right? But we don't know. In fact, what is their understanding level? And of course, sometimes you have a mixed group. You have students from different cultures. All the times it happens. So these can be the barriers. Yes, you are right. There can be some technical barriers. Of course, there can be some psychological problems would be there, right? And of course, the culture of the teacher, the culture of the students, particularly if both belong to different cultures. So these things can influence on your content of the lesson. Let's see, in fact, what are the influences. Well, students, despite the enormous, of course, that you have, we have variety of published material and teaching aids, and of course they are at the disposal of language teacher. I mean, the teacher can access to internet, the teacher can access to blogs, teacher can access to research articles, teacher has access to digital library, teacher has access to other manual libraries, but still, you see, and things are in the control of the teacher, right? Everything is at the disposal of the teacher, but still there are a number of factors which can severely restrict their freedom of choice, right? And of course the techniques and materials for a particular lesson. Still there are some factors which restrict the teacher in his freedom of choice and his material, and of course other things. In general terms, these stem from what? Right? Physical teaching situations, right? Once you teach, right? So what are things that hinder you? What are the physical teaching situations? And the nature of the students, the influences of an organization in determining a syllabus and the way in which people are understood to learn language. Again, there are factors, of course, because once you teach in an institute, so you have to keep in mind the organizational need. You have to keep in mind the management's, in fact, the priorities. So these are some factors which can influence on the content of the lesson. We cannot make our lesson unless, of course, we keep in mind the organizationals, the goals, unless we are clear about the management, the policies, management, the priorities. So these things can, of course, may influence on our lesson plan. So these are something that we will be talking about. What are the influences on your lesson plan? You see, particularly on the content of the lesson. So first of all, what the point is, practical constraints, right? So what does practical constraint mean? That really, I mean, these are the constraints which really, of course, hinder, in fact, which really influence the content of the lesson plan. So first one is the time. Now time is very important. right? And here time mean that minutes are the hours for that particular lesson plan. You see, if you have 40 minutes of class or 50 minutes of a class, right, or if you have 75 minutes of class, so this depends, that you see how much time is there. Again, it comes, of course, the organizational policy, organizational timetable, right, and other factors. Sometimes you see, you might be in some language center where you are given just 2 hours class, and in that 2 hours class, if you are a teacher of language, so you have to, teach 4 skills, which you find it's hard, because in 2 hours time, you have to teach, you have to help them in speaking, help them in reading, writing, and of course other skills. So this, you find it hard, but you cannot change the plan. You see, because organization has set a rule that, well, there will be spoken English class, there will be spoken French class for 2 hours only, from 6 to 8. So the teacher, in fact, of course, sometime if there's one teacher is teaching that course, or there are 2 teachers are sharing that course, so then they divide that, of course, for 1 hour means for the reading and writing skills, and remaining 3rd and 4th hour for other 2 skills. So here, the time factor is there. And again, the time, as far as time factor is concerned, you see how many classes do you have, that frequency of lessons. Frequency of lessons mean that, of course, that you see, do you have 1 class in a week, or do you have 5 classes in a week? If you are a writing skill teacher, and if you have 5 classes in a week, every class, of course, every class has 40 minutes class. So again, there are classes, but frequency is 5 times a week, right? Similarly, reading 5 times a week, of course, listening 5 times a week, right? So all these 4 skills, there are, you can say, 4 hours session in a center, right? Some universities are following this pattern, that you see they have 5 hours for the language, the classes. So in 5 hours, of course, what they do, that they allocate 1 hour for listening skill, 1 hour for speaking skill, 1 hour for reading skill, and 1 hour for writing skill. And again, there's an extra hour for, they call it EA, error analysis, right? So these are the 5 hours that you see every, good university or good educational center gives to the students. But in some private centers, of course, where they have a resource problem, so they only, in fact, give 2 hours to the students. In those 2 hours, what they happen, their own 4 skills are to be discussed but it depends, right? Or in some centers, you might have seen there are 3-hour session. But some good universities, you see, there are the classes, and 5 hours morning, and maybe 5 hours in the evening, if you adopt for the morning or if the evening shifts. So over there, frequency is very high. 5 classes a week for the writing, reading, listening, and speaking, fine, it makes sense. But if there's only 1 class, frequency is only once a week. So in this case, once you start the next session, you have to be very active. You have to rephrase. You have to rather recap the previous session, like we do here in this lecture. So when I start a lecture, what I do, then I review the previous lecture to just pick up the thread, to recap it from the previous lecture. Or when I end my lecture, what I do, that I summarize, right, the whole lecture. Right, so that you would be able to understand, you would be able to know the summary of the whole lecture. So this is what we do. So in a weekly class, generally the practice is that, you see, the teacher spends more time in recapping, because the teacher, that of course students meet once in a week, and particularly the people who are pursuing the degree programs, and there is a sport course over there as English. Right, they call it communication skills, or they call it technical skills, or the technical writing, or sometimes they call it reading comprehension. So this is the way. If you meet for a once in a week, so then when you start the next session, you have to recap the previous session. So frequency is important, frequency of lesson. But ideally, if you see that if you are a language student, so weekly, once in a week class may not help you that much. There would be improvement, but not that much. So if you want to learn language really, then you need to allocate time, you need to give time to that center, and the center also needs to give you more time. So that is important. Another important point is, as far as physical practical constraints are concerned, is the time of the day. It is very important. As you know, my dear students, that the morning time you are fresh, right? So I mean, your productivity is naturally high in the morning. Why? Because you had a good sleep, you slept well, and you are fresh, and you are very, I mean, fast in the partake. You quickly learn things. And again, if you compare it with the night time, of course, you will be very slow. So the morning hours, they are the best hours, in fact. So again, while making the timetable in the center, so the management must keep this factor in mind, that of course, if you feel that the first hour is very important, so give that hour to an important skill. Generally, I have seen that, you know, in centers what happened, that last classes are given to speaking skills, because people enjoy speaking, and you see, and of course, after having 4 hour the classes, generally students get tired. So that speaking may not harm the teacher, of course, and also the students. The first class, generally it depends if the students are weak in writing or grammar. So in some centers, the first hour is given to error analysis, or in some center, the first hour is given to writing skills. So time of the day is a very important factor. It's quite natural. And again, my dear students, that of course we need not to waste this early morning hours of the day, because you see, I mean, if you work after Fajr, for example, so that is the ideal time, and if you sleep after Fajr, it means you waste that time. So that is a very crucial time from Fajr to 10 a.m. So this time your intake is very high. So the teachers, of course, the management of language centers particularly must keep this in mind, that you see the time of the day is important. Evening students particularly, if the students come for the evening, they would be slow in the partake. Why? Because it's a natural way that the whole day, in fact, you work somewhere and then you come in the evening to have a language class. Yes, improvement would be there, but it would be slow. It would be slow as compared to the morning students. In the morning, teachers are fresh, students are fresh, so they work, they put efforts, and they learn. However, in the evening, both the teachers are tired and the students are tired. So obviously, in that case, the learning would be slow as compared to the morning time, right? And we have seen that, you see, even for example, sometime you don't work anywhere, but you see, you wait for the class till 3 p.m. So the whole day, right? You get tired. In fact, maybe you haven't done anything, right? So your tension level will be a bit better than those people who work in the morning. But if you compare it with the people who work, so it's very slow, in fact. Similarly, in fact, sometime you have the language classes after 6 p.m. So again, it's hard, it's not easy to have language classes after having a full office hours from 9 to 5, and you come to a language center to learn a language. So again, you have to see the need. If you feel that you have to make your career, fine. So I suggest you need to join a language center which offers language program in the morning. So this is what we call it, my dear students, the time of the day is very important. Another practical constraint is, my dear student, is what we call it number of students. It's really a problem, a huge problem you see these days in our language classes. Generally, we say that the language class should not be more than 15 students or maximum 20 students. But you might have seen that sometime in a language class there are 40 students are there are 50 students are there. So that strength creates a problem that can be a practical constraint. Because if there are 50 students in the class and every student just speaks for one sentence, which mean if one student needs just 1 minute, so the class will be over, because class duration is 40 to 45 minutes. So the larger the class, the more would be the problem. So that's why we recommend for a language class that it should be in, of course, ideal strength. And if the management, cannot, of course, afford to reduce the number of students, then what management can do, that management can improve resource of the class, right? For example, you can use multimedia in the class. You can use you can have better rooms where there shouldn't be any echo. So by improving technology in the class, by improving the classroom resource, by improving the classroom management, that can be managed. But again, you see, if you see the results of that class, if you compare results of a larger class with the smaller class, so most of the cases you see the smaller class strength wins, performs better than a larger class. Some people are of the view that, well, a larger class, there are more minds, they sit together, the more discussions are there, so naturally more learning is there. Yes, fine. I mean, I don't deny that fact. It happens sometimes, but sometimes it becomes a chaos, right? So we need not to overcome that problem. It should not be chaos. It should be an ideal class that of course, you see that should be managed by the teacher and of course the students. So therefore, it is important. However, for a small class, yes, you see, we feel that there is more concentration, more attention of the teacher to each and every student, and students concentrate. In fact, the teacher in fact helps them out. So the learning, of course, the learning speeds improves, and the learners of course become happy. They feel more motivated as compared to a bigger class where it is difficult for the teacher to know the names of the students. But for a language class, my dear students, it is very important that the teacher should know the faces of the students. Teacher should know names of the students, in fact. And of course, if teacher can know the background of the students, if teacher can know why students are learning this language, if teacher can know, in fact, you see their understanding level, so it would definitely help in the language learning process. So number of students is very important. You have to see it can be a practical constraint. If the strength increases more than 20, if there is no way out, management must improve resource of the class. Then availability of aids, of course, I told you, my dear students, that you see that the language class must be well equipped with the necessary teaching aids. If it is a listening class, there should be proper mic, there should be proper multimedia, or if there is no computer available, then there can be cassettes and all that. So properly, in fact, the language class, if it is not well equipped with available aids, so it can be a problem. Like generally it happens, see, when you start a language program, you have to have a resource, and if you don't have a resource, then you cannot run that language program successfully. So if you are in the mind to have your own language center that you can run easily, so what you can do, my dear students, yes, simple, make available the available resource, the teaching aids of a language center. So it's not expensive. You say you need one computer and of course a mic. And even if you see, nowadays we are in this age of technology, and buying a laptop is better than buying a cassette player, all that. So that with speakers you can make everybody listen, right? And it is easy, of course. You have Wi-Fi connection with you, so you can use internet wherever you want to. So these are some of the practical constraints that you see that can influence what? Right, your lessons. Which are concerned, my dear students, the time is an important factor. Time of the class. What is the time of the class, and how long the class is? So again, time plays an important role. And then weekly, what is the frequency of a lesson? Do you have a classes once in a week, twice in a week, thrice in a week, or 5 times in a week? So we saw that the more the frequency, the better for the learners and the better for the teacher as well. And if there is only one class in a week, so then teacher has to be very careful. For every next class, he has to recap, he has to discuss the previous things, and he can move forward. So these are what we call them practical constraints that can influence your lesson. So another important the point is, you see, that is what the teacher, right? So the teacher also can influence the content of what? Your lesson. So personality of a teacher is important. We had a detailed discussion on the role of the teacher in the second lecture, you remember. So teacher, in fact, needs to be role model for the learners. If the teacher is teacher of a foreign language and if he communicates in L1 in the class, so students would definitely copy him. So the first thing is that with the teacher's personality, that how teacher look. It is important the teacher's dress, how teacher talks, how teacher walks, how teacher uses mic, how teacher uses podium, right? How teacher in fact talks with the students, how teacher enters the class, how teacher leaves the class, and the commitment level of the audience, right? These are the factors. So teacher in fact is a complete the personality. So that's why it is not easy to be a good teacher. I mean, people are in this field, but you see, if you do a survey, you will come to know that you see only 10% are really good teachers. The rest are just playing with this profession. So if you are planning to make your career in this, so the personality of the teacher, and I told you that what is the personality? It is sum total of your nature and nurture. So if you are, if you want to be a good teacher, so you need what? The training, of course, right? Nurturing is there, nature is of course there. So this is what the first thing that can influence. The second point, that is the teacher. The teacher is the one who teaches that language, and how he teaches, right? If he is competent enough, if he can manage his class well, and if he knows how to talk in that language. So this is very important. For some teachers, for example, the role play is an important methodological repertoire. For others, it is an unknown area full of risk. So like I told you, that the teachers, how teachers sees an activity. For some teachers, public speaking is a very important part, and for some teachers, public speaking is not important. For some teachers, the group discussion is very important, and for them, public speaking stands nowhere. So it varies from a teacher to teacher. Some teachers feel that they should be only a lecture in the class, and the students should listen and they respond, and that would be the language learning. But again, you see, if you are a trained teacher, if you are a TEFL trained teacher, then you would not believe in that. You would say that, of course, that when you teach, your intention is to make your learners speak that language, and if you fail to do that, it means you are not a good language teacher. It means you are not, in fact, coming up to the expectation of the institution. If your students, in fact, respond, and if your students learn that language, and if they are able to communicate in that language, which means that you see, you are successful, right? So whatever activities are there, you see, they vary from the teacher to teacher. Some teachers are there, they try to create new activities, and it's a really good thing. And of course, attitude of a teacher is important. That of course, positive attitude, its commitment level, right, is very important. And if the teacher is not committed, so it can influence the content of the lesson. So teacher's loyalty, teacher's commitment, his punctuality, right, his in fact devotion for this profession is very important. So passion for teaching is a must. If you are a teacher by choice, of course, this is very important. But if you are a teacher by force or by constraints, so then you cannot do well in the class. So some of you, if you want to be teachers in your life, in your career, so then you need to develop this passion for teaching, and really it's a great profession. Right? It's a really great profession. Why? Because you become role model for the students. In fact, though you teach them language, right? And of course, when you teach language, you teach them so many things, right? So that's why, of course, the personality of the teacher is important. How teacher reacts in the class, how teacher talks in the class. So that's why it's very important. Some teachers exaggerate in the class, and later on they expose themselves. That's why you think double when you talk and all that. So this is what, my dear students, the teacher is. That again, it can influence on the content of the lesson, right? And I told you that different teachers have different style, and different teachers have different in fact mind for different activities. For some teachers, role play is an important activity, and for others, role play is of no use, right? And for some teachers, and pair work is important, and for some teachers, closed pair work is important, and for some, open pair works are preferred. So it varies from teacher to teacher. Is that clear, students? All right. So the next thing is what the students can also influence the content of a lesson. So again, the need analysis of the students is very important, right? I told you that, you see in the last lecture, that the aims, of course, of the lessons are very important. And then we also see what are the aims and what are the procedures to achieve those aims. So again, the students' needs cannot be denied, right? Cannot be put aside. So needs of the learner in fact are the must. Fine. If you know, and the point is, how can we know the needs of the students, of the students, of the learners, particularly of the foreign language? So you can ask them. In fact, one is that, and the needs may vary, right? Needs of the learners may vary, in fact, but it doesn't mean that, you see, you cater to the needs of each and every individual in the class. So what we do, that you try to cater the common needs of the students, right? Collective needs of the students, definitely. Majority of the students right, in fact, are trying to communicate in that language. So of course, some of them are trying to improve that language to go abroad, and some of them are trying to improve language to work in their offices, and some of them are trying to improve the language to be a CSR, and some of them are trying to improve the language to be in the call center. So every learner has a different need, but overall all the learners want to be fluent in that language. So therefore, of course, the needs of the students are very important, and this can affect on the content, because if we cater to the needs of each and every student, then it seems a difficult task, because there are 20 students in the class. So 20 needs, maybe of course that the needs can vary. So what we do, we have a solution is that we keep the common needs of the students in mind. So that is important, and then for that we perform need analysis of the students. And how can you get data for that? Of course, when you induct students, you can interview students, and that test can place, for example, if the 10 students have one specific need, so they can be placed in a separate group. Or there are 20 students, in fact, they all want to be in a call center, so their needs can be common, so they can be placed in a separate group. So interviewing process, or the what we call it, the process of admission is very important for the language the classes. In private center, you might have seen that they don't have this process, so ultimately their success ratio is low, right? They cannot help students as those institutions who really conduct their tests. They check their understanding level, and then they place them in a specific group. So this is very important for a language class, my dear students, that the needs analysis of the students are to be conducted, and according as per the needs of the learner, lesson plan is designed. So the needs of the students can influence on the content of the lesson. Then age and interest of the students are very important. You see that adult teaching, like you see, we call it there is a Cambridge offered course, CELTA. You might have heard the name CELTA, CELTA. So Certificate in English Language Teaching for Adults. So teaching to adults and teaching to youth and teaching to children, yes, of course, is important, right? So age is a factor. Teaching to adults, yes. See, when you teach adults, so you need to keep so many things in mind: the age of of course those adults, and we know that of course the learning process slows with the passage of time. So maybe we need more repetitions as compared to a class of young students, a class of students who have just done their A levels, or they have grade 10 and they are in the language learning class. So their learning would be faster than those who are adults, because they might have come from their offices. In their offices, there is no culture of that language. So first of all, it is, first you have to change their mind. maybe they feel that they cannot learn. There are some learners who come and they feel that, well, now it is not age for them to learn. So this is, you have to remove this misconception. You have to tell them that the learning never stops and there is no age for this learning. Still you can learn. Of course, the pace may be the problem, speed may be the problem, but you can learn. So you have to motivate those adult learners, and then you have to design activities for the official people. Of course, the activities should be from the offices, right? And for the students, the activities may be from the institutions. So, and also interest of the students. Age and interest of the students are important. Some students come to improve their language because they want to be in media, they want to be anchors, right? So we need to consider the age and the interest of the students. So this can also, influence on the content of a lesson. Another point is attitude and personality of the students. Again, it's very important, right? When you teach in a class, what happens that you find definitely different students. Some are very good students. In fact, some are very respectable students. But again, there are some who are troublemakers. So it's very easy to manage good students, but it is tactful to handle the troublemakers in the class. So you have to be very careful. Sometimes these troublemakers need your regard, your love, and you can handle the situation, right? So here, this comes under the classroom, the management, right? So therefore, the attitude of the students and their personalities are important. Some students are really serious in learning, and you can easily motivate them, and they start and they put effort. Some are the problematic students. They need motivation, they need love, and they need proper management, and you can easily help them out. Mixed ability classes, yes, again, it's a problem that it would be very ideal if you have a class with the same ability. So it's quite natural that you have the students and they have different abilities. So again, you have to see here in this case, how this can affect the content of the lesson is that, you see, when you make your lesson plan, see, so what you have to keep in mind, the shining, and also keep in mind the weak students, right? So considering the weakest link in the class is also important. It does not mean that you almost ignore the shining students. You have to more motivate the shining students. You have to give encouragement to the good students. Okay, go on and tell them the way you can excel. And then, of course, you have to help them out, help those who are the weak students in the class. So this is very important as far as the students are concerned, their ability, the culture, their age level, their gender, and particularly when the system is a co-ed system. So over there, you see, if the self-respect of the student is very important. So in a language class particularly, you see, you respect the students, in fact, and you try to be the courteous in the class, right? Discipline is there, of course. There's no compromise on the principle. Even when you have to punish the students, so there are ways to punish the students, right? That which means so that so that your message would be conveyed and the learner would understand, right? That's why when you have to punish the students, right, for some reasons, for example, one can be the punishment that you are talking about something and you feel that there is no attention. In the meantime, you can ask the student, what was the last thing that you said? So then maybe the next time you may have maximum attention of the class. So this is what, my dear students, that is another, of course, factor that can influence on the content of the class. Another one is, my dear students, what? Motivation and maintenance of interest. So motivation and the maintenance of interest, it can also influence on the content of the lesson. Context is very important, right? So I told you that, you see, whenever you teach language item or whenever you plan your lesson, so you need to contextualize that item in a specific context. So contextualization of an exponent is very important, and you have to create that context as well, right? Because when we teach language in a context, so the learning in fact improves, learners enjoy it, and even the teacher finds it relevant and useful, right? So you have to create a situation, right? So this can again influence on the content of the lesson, right? So that's why the context is important, and I told you that context changes the meaning. In fact, context is what? The situation. What is the exact situation, and what in this situation which language, right, we need for it. So that is very important as far as your lesson is concerned, and this can influence on the content of the lesson. It is what? The context, right? Content and context are two things. Now what is the difference? Content is your subject matter, right? And context is that situation. For example, there is a situation that there is a class and the teacher needs to give instructions to the students. Now the teacher uses imperatives, right? So what is it? That the content is what? Using imperatives. And situation is that maybe the students were making noise in the class, and the teacher enters the class, and initially in fact he scolds the class, right? And after scolding, maybe he gives some directions. So I hope you got the situation. Giving imperatives, in fact, maybe he scolds initially, of course, because they deserve that scolding. So there was a situation was created, and sometimes you create a situation and sometimes it is created artificially, in fact, or it is created naturally. At times you create a situation, and at times it can be created naturally. For example, you have to talk about weather, you see, and it's raining outside, and you go out and talk about raining, right? And you talk about hailing, maybe hailing starts hailing after some time, and you talk about hailing, then maybe there's a thundering, and maybe there's lightning. So what? That there is, the weather was bad outside, it was raining, it was hailing, it was thundering, it was lightning, and there is a situation, right? So therefore, that you see, language teaching in a context is in demand. So being a student of this course, the context is important. It doesn't mean that content is aside. Content is important as well, but the context, of course, if you teach a content in a particular context, so then naturally you would be successful, in fact, a successful teacher. So my dear students, when you prepare your lesson plan, so that can influence on the content of the lesson plan, that context, that how to create that context. And here you have to think again, of course, you have to think to create a particular the context for language teaching. So sometimes you may not find, of course, sometimes or you find it hard to create a context. For example, talking about a river, right, or talking about a dam, and maybe, of course, if you take the student to the dam, it's fine. If you can't take them to the dam, so what you can do is that you can bring a video, of course. So that can be shown, and then you can tell them, well, let's go to Tarvela Dam, let's go to Mangla Dam, and then of course you can ask question and elicit what to take with you, in fact, right? Which costumes are required, and how far is it? Which vehicle we should hire, and this and that. So what is it? The context is important. So this context can influence on the what contents of a lesson. Then relevance and meaningfulness of a lesson again is important, because if the lesson is not relevant, so it, first of all, it demotivates the teacher, because teacher gets the message and faster than the student. Teacher gets the message earlier than the student, right? So this is very important, that when you make a lesson plan, and you need to be relevant, you try to be relevant, right? So this relevance is important, and if you are not relevant, that can influence on the content, right? Because relevant teaching, naturally it motivates the learners, and if it is not relevant, it demotivates, right, the learners, and it demotivates the teacher as well. So that's why when you make your lesson plan, so what you do, that include relevant language items, that language to, relevance to what? Again, relevant to the needs, again, the needs analysis of the students. So the content that you are teaching to the students must be relevant, student must need those things. And then of course meaningfulness of lesson, right? A lesson must have a meaning. In fact, meaningfulness means that understandable, right? That of course, if the students find them, of course, complex, if there is no meaning, the teacher has to make it meaningful. There must be meaning in that lesson, of course. So it means that, you see, if we talk of, the things which cannot be the possible, right? So, for example, talking about aerospace, right? And if the teacher the students have never heard about that space, so those things would not be meaningful for the learners. And again, the needs of the learners must be catered, right? And if you cater to the needs of the learner, so naturally, what happens? It can influence on the content of the lesson. And then motivation and interest of the learner is also important. You need to motivate your students. Motivation is a must, right? Motivation is, of course, in the first stage we talk about the warm-up stage. So motivation, right, can influence on the content of the lesson, right? How can it influence? Of course, because motivation, with every stage, motivation is important. The presentation, of course, you need to motivate the students for the presentation stage, and keep on motivating for the whole stage, for the whole phase of that lesson. The presentation stage, yes, motivation. So that motivation, helps the students to grasp things. In fact, once it is a practice going on, again motivation is important, because this practice would help them in the next phase, in fact, and of course, and since practice is in the control phase, so of course this is important, very important. And then again, interest of, see, that this motivation and the interest of the learners must be cared, must be considered, right? So because interest of the learner, if you cater, if you inquire the needs of the students, and if you keep in mind their interest of the learning that language, so you will feel that, you see, this can influence on the content. So when you think of when you plan your lesson for a class, so these things you must keep in mind, that how would I motivate the students if they get demotivated, or if they find it above their heads, how to help them out, or if they find that this content is not relevant, how to put them back. So these are some things, that is factors that can influence on the content of the lesson. Fine. Well, students, so there is another influence on the content of lesson, that is what? See, the influence of syllabus and exam. And you know, my dear student, that of course syllabus is important. At times you are given a list of items to be covered, and you see that time constraint as well, we talked about earlier. So at times you see that this can influence your syllabus, again the length of the syllabus. At times, you are given say 50 the topics to be covered in a class where you meet only 2 times in a week, right? And again, exam is there, of course. Like you see, if you teach in a public sector, university or the college or a center where there is proper exam, right? This can also affect, my dear students, see, on the content, because on the one hand, when you teach foreign language, so you have to consider that these students have to take an exam. Like if you teach English in Saudi Arabia, over there, you see, students come for a particular time. They come for 4 months, and then they have to take an exam to be in the professional colleges. And even if you teach in Pakistan, if you are in a public university, for example, so what happens that you see you keep in mind that there is an exam, there is a midterm, of course, like that is a system, the policy of the university, that at the end of that program the student would be taking their orals, they'll be taking their written exam. So that can also influence on the content. You have to consider these factors as well, that this much is the content and this is the time I have to cover. So in this way, yes, sometimes it happens that you try to cover the contents and you have to prepare students for the exam. So at times, you see, you might have seen, you might have felt that because of that the schedule, the tough schedule, the teacher feels that he cannot help students, in fact, in the best possible way. So what he does, that in fact, initially he moves slowly, and then after some time he has to enhance his pace, and he gets the pace, and in this way sometimes you see students suffering in a way that they cannot practice language more, and they cannot produce language more, and because they become exam oriented. Like, so therefore these are the exam and of course the syllabus can influence the content. And you see that of course the students' needs, of course, they're important, and the syllabus, when you design the syllabus, of course, at the macro level, so we need to see the students' needs. Like you see there is an arrow from students' needs to syllabus. So syllabus is for the students, and again when you see that which level is there, is it elementary level or advanced level or what functional level. And then in syllabus, what are the aims of the lesson? When you syllabus, of course, syllabus is a body. Under syllabus, you have, for example, there are 10 lessons, there are 15 lessons, or there are 20 lessons, right? So again, there are 20 lessons. What are the aims of those lessons, right? Every lesson must have an aim, right? And then once aims are clear, then you see what are the lesson procedure, how the lesson will proceed. Will it be a lecture method? Will it be a discussion method? Will it be what we call it, a group activity? Fine. Will it be a case study method? Of course, these days you might have seen that sometimes you see the reading skills are taught to a case study, and even speaking, in fact, the students are given a case study and they read and they discuss that case study, of course, particularly if you talk of management sciences students, of economics students, where the teaching is done through a case study, and the case study is, of course, a new method, and people consider it an effective method, of course. So from lesson procedure, you have what? Achievement of lesson aims. Do you see that? Whatever procedure you have used, right? So was that effective? Was that procedure was effective to achieve aims you have set at the beginning of the lesson? So again, the aims are there, and for aims, right, what do? You see what is the lesson procedure, and once you use that procedure, was that effective or not? If it was effective, good. If it is not, you can reconsider it. So then how we can judge the effectiveness of that procedure? If we achieve our aims, right? If we achieve the aims, it means the procedure was okay. So once you achieve your aims, then you see what? Achievement of the syllabus objectives. It means the objective that you said, that you stated, achieved. Objective was to make student good at speaking, for example, or objective was to make student fluent. So it was objective. And then what? You see what happened, what we did, that you see, of course, that to help the students. And what are, of course, mean? I told you that there are aims are general, objective is what? Specific. Fine. And the aim was to help them speak well, right? And objective may be to help them, right? To help them, you see, to make them fluent, in fact. Fine, students. So this is what, see, if achievement of syllabus objectives, and which is what? A satisfaction of the student's needs. So if you see this, the diagram, of course, that is in front of you, so it speaks that, well, student needs are important. Fine. If student needs are fulfilled, it means that you are a success. But if the student needs are not fulfilled, so we can say that we are we are a failure. So that's why, I mean, this knowing the needs of the students again is an important point. That how can we, and research is required on this case particularly, to know the needs of the learners, and knowing the needs and catering their needs is a must, in fact. And this is a big problem that you see in our system of education, where of course overhauling of the system is required, where there is no proper induction methods. In fact, people come for different the programs without having any the prereqs, and sometimes people get admission through other references, and those students cannot go on with the class. So therefore, the needs of the students are important, and you see that in the language centers the dropout ratio is very high. So why students come and they get admission and they leave? Because their needs are not fulfilled, right? They came to have a different purpose. They came for a different purpose, and once they joined, they felt that this course was not meant for that. So this is a problem that you see, and if somebody is not happy, why should he waste his time? So that's why in a language center, of course, the needs of the students must be known first, of course, and how we can know them through research, through surveys, through the questionnaires, in fact. So once and then an analysis of those needs are important. And then knowing those needs, then you try to see your design syllabus, and then of course under syllabus you see the different lessons, right? And then again the aims of the lessons should be clear, and then you decide on procedure. What would be your procedure? And then if the procedure works, if we can say that there is achievement of lesson plans, and once it is done, you can say there is achievement of syllabus objectives, and that satisfies the students. So dear student, this is what we can say, that how syllabus and exam influences the content of the lesson. So the key point in this slide that we talked about, that the student needs must be known, and then accordingly we make our syllabus and lesson plans and procedure, find an achievement of the procedure, and once we do it, it means that objective of the syllabus has been achieved, and if you do it, it means students are satisfied. So needs of the students must be satisfied. Students' needs, and then satisfaction of students' needs. This is important. I mean, this is, of course, if you see, there are two extremes. Student needs are one side, and then there are intermediaries. Fine. And then on the other side, you see that needs have been satisfied. If needs have been satisfied, so things are fine. If needs have not been satisfied, so we need to reconsider. This one is, of course, the influences of syllabus and exam on the content. So dear student, this is what we talked about in this lesson. It was second part of the lesson plan. So we discussed in this lecture that despite the enormous variety of published materials and teaching aids at the disposal of language teachers, there are a number of factors which can severely restrict the freedom of choice of your teacher, of the teachers particularly. And what we discussed in this way, that there are some physical constraints. In physical constraints, we talked about the time, we talked about frequency of lessons, we talked about the teacher, we talked about student, and we talked about motivation, we talked about the context, right? And we talked about in fact relevance of the material, and we also talked about the syllabus, in fact the syllabus and what exam. These are some factors, in fact, my dear students, which can influence on the content of your lesson plan, right? So therefore, I mean, if you talk about these few factors and what can we do while making our lesson plan, the point is why we talked about this, why we talk about these in fact influences on the content of the lesson, because when you make a lesson for your class, you need to keep in mind that what are the aims of this lesson, and of course, and the needs of the students, right? The beginning, in fact, if I rephrase myself, needs of the students must be taken, must be considered, and then fine, of course, in the light of the needs, then you make plans to satisfy those needs. And in this, there can be some constraints can be there can be some physical constraints, right? And we need to know those physical constraints, and we need to know how they influence on the content of the lesson. So with this, it's time to say goodbye. See you in the next class. Please review the previous lectures once we move on. Thank you very much.